And good morning and welcome to another broadcast of the ACT Chess Association's live events, online that is, being held at the moment on chess.com while the local chess clubs are looking at going back. And I've got some potentially good news on that regard. The ACT government has lifted some more restrictions on club, as in licensed clubs, and venue capacities. And so at the moment, both the Tuggeranong Chess Club, who meet with the Vikings group down in Tuggeranong, and the Gungahlin Chess Club, who meet with the East Lakes group here in Gungahlin, are making inquiries about how soon we can reopen. It does depend, of course, on whether the clubs are comfortable with having us back in. But as they're now open again and having people in regularly during the day, we are very, very hopeful that we will be able to meet in the evenings, possibly by the end of the month, maybe even sooner. So watch this space, or not watch this space, because one of the side effects of that is these streams will probably disappear once we're back meeting face to face. But for now, we are still playing online. And we are running our regular sequence of Monday, Wednesday and Thursday chess tournaments. Monday is Blitz, Wednesday is Rapid, Thursday is Long Time Control. And so last night was a very small, I will say very small Blitz tournament, only 6 players sadly turned up. It was a very strong event, ran for 3 rounds. It was won by Harry Press on 3 out of 3, ahead of Miles Patterson on 2 out of 3, and in equal third place, Michael Reading and Amir Malik, who drew their final round game in a fantastic game where I thought the position was completely drawn because it was a rook and pawn ending with equal number of pawns, but Amir just tweaked out a slight instructive edge, but then having won a pawn and in fact won a rook, managed to then fail to convert, and Michael Reading found a very clever stalemate trick at the end to save the game. But that's not the game I'm showing. I am going to show the game between Harry Press, who won the tournament, and Alana Chibnall, who was the second seed. This was played in the last round. Harry was on 2 out of 2. Alana was on 1 out of 2. Win for Harry, wrapped up the tournament for him. Reason I'm choosing this game, in part, because there wasn't a lot of games to choose from, to be honest. And also there is a fantastic variation in the middle that never got played, but I'd really like to look at it nonetheless. So here we go. E4, C5, Knight C3. The first trick from Harry Press. I work with both players on and off. I coach Alana Chibnall, and I'm basically a punching bag for Harry these days. He is my son, for those that aren't aware. And it's important to point out that it was his mother that taught him how to play chess rather than me, and as a consequence he's a lot better chess player than I am. But I've seen both of them play lots of chess over the years. So knight c3 is a bit of a way of avoiding some knight off main lines and some bishop b5 ideas which are being debated. And d4 is a bit of a surprise here, because obviously after pawn takes, you're taking back with the queen. And the queen is a little bit exposed. I think the idea with something like knight c6 now is it's going to walk into bishop b5, so knight f6, b3 is another idea. So I think in the end, Harry's choosing his openings based on the sort of Magnus Carlsen type approach these days, where openings aren't necessarily good or bad. You just play positions that you feel comfortable with. You almost start with the middle game rather than the opening. And as long as you're developing pieces and putting on squares where the pieces are useful later in the game, there's nothing really wrong with that. Black, on the other hand, is playing the more traditional knight off setup here. So bishop e2, now knight c6 to pump the queen. No bishop b5 because of a6, of course, so the queen just drops back here. e6. Castle's queenside, which happens a lot, normally not with the bishop on b2, because the bishop normally doesn't go to a b2 in a lot of Sicilian lines. But we'll see how the game plays out. Bishop e7, king for safety, b5 makes sense, trying to attack on the king's queenside. Castles might have also been worthwhile, although white would have followed through with a plan of f3, g4, h4, I suspect. Because f3 gets played here. Interesting enough, after b5, there is a temptation to play a move like a3, and in fact, my analysis engine was saying that a3 is perfectly fine. I'm giving it a dubious, because it's not needed to be played, and also, more importantly, it provides a bit of a target to open up the position on the queen side after b4, because essentially either a takes b, and the b file gets opened, or b takes a and the b file gets opened. In either case, black is getting some open lines on the queen side that they may not deserve. So queen c7, g4, in anticipation of castling. So black holds off castling. Black doesn't necessarily want to castle and then just get hit with g5, h4, h5 type ideas. So knight ge2 develops nicely. h5 gets played here, so g5 is almost forced. Knight back to d7. Now, at the top of this broadcast, I did mention that there was a line I really wanted to look at, and it's about to kick off now. g6 actually turns out to be a surprisingly good move for white. I'm not sure whether white considered it, but it turns out that g6, because you're threatening just to take on f7, for example. So if you take, knight f4 is the right follow-up, and you're hitting the pawns on e6 and g6. And black has a couple of ways of defending, and I'll start with the sensible way of defending before I go to the completely mad way of defending. So knight f8, okay. Bishop to h3 to gang up on the e6 pawn again. Bishop to c8 to defend. Knight ce2 coming across here. King f7 and knight d3 with the idea of playing the queen to f4 with some sort of an attack. This, even though you've sacrificed a pawn at this point, white is a lot better, and it's a good example of sort of just building up an initiative here, of taking, basically every move is improving your position while threatening something at the same time. The crazy line that I want to look at, by the way, is, if I can get this one right, yep, having a look now, is after knight f4, if you just go crazy and try and defend with king f7, defending both pawns, you get slammed with knight takes e6 here. You could run away, but your position's pretty terrible if you do with the queen. So king takes e6, and let's just go for the king hunt now. Queen d5, king f6, and if you're boring, you're just going to play knight takes b5 here. And when you block the check, knight takes c7 is good enough. Just wins the queen, wins the game pretty much. But if you want to have some real fun after king f6, e5. Okay, knight c takes e5, knight e4. So e5 was to clear the square for the knight to go to e4. King goes to f5, only square. Bishop h3. You could block with the, make sure you can't block with the knight, so the king has to keep marching. King to f4. Bishop to c1, and we've just got a good old-fashioned king hunt here. The king is just being dragged all the way down the board. Rook hf1, king e2, and knight g3 is mate. In fact, there's about 10 mates in that position. Queen d2 was mate as well. And there you go. So the king's just marched all the way from e8 all the way up the board down to e2 where he gets mated by the knight. So fans of king hunts, that was a little line I wanted to show you. Of course, white needed to play g6 to kick that one off. Instead, in the real game, just chose h4 to block. And that's not a bad idea either, but g6 was a little bit more dynamic. By the way, this game was played with a time limit of 5 minutes each, no increment. So, yep, spotting these things at short time controls isn't always a given. So instead, black castled after h4. g6 can still be played. You're not mating the king so much, but you are still, after pawn takes pawn, the knight going to f4. So queen e3. Queen b6 was probably the safest idea now for black. Just swapping queens off. You get a different game, of course. Knight takes, knight f4. And it's a little bit better for white, but not massively better. So, knight goes to c5. Bishop to h3 was quite a good move, I thought. Not only is it at the moment on the same diagonal as the king, it turns out that this bishop becomes quite powerful later on when the position gets opened up a bit more. So king to b8 to break that pin. Knight to d4. Rook he8. We take on c6. Bishop takes c6. So we've got out of the opening. We're in the middle game. We're looking for a few targets. The knight on e2 is going to f4 to attack the pawn on h5, which encourages g6. And also white can no longer play g6. Queen to f4, hitting f7. So the bishop retreats, to allow the queen to defend sideways. And then rook d2 with the idea of now trying to build up pressure on the d pawn by swinging the rooks across. And e5 deals with that in one way by stopping the queen, joining in and forcing the queen to move. But on the other hand, leaves that d pawn backward for the moment. So after queen e3, black plays d5 straight away. And dynamically, it's a good move. It opens up the position. And I'll just show you the alternative that could happen. A move like King B7 just sitting. But Knight C3, and then you're going to take advantage of the square in front of the backward pawn by dropping on to Knight to D5. But Black has Knight E6 here, and the idea being that you want to either hit F4 or D4. White could possibly give up the bishop on H3 for the knight, just to stop it from doing that. But then after F takes, D5's covered, and the D5 push is also on the cards as well. So Knight D5, bishop takes in this case, so Black is the one that's getting rid of the knight. D takes, Knight F4, bishop goes back to F1. And this position's kind of okay for Black, except for the bishop on F8 really has no future here. It's stuck by his own pawns, her own pawns on D6 and E5, and you know, G7 maybe, but it's a pretty forlorn bishop. While both White's bishops still pretty active here. So D5 was played instead, and I think dynamically that's a better idea. It's keeping both bishops in the game. E takes, rook takes, bishop takes, rook to D1. So we've picked up a tempo to put the rook. It turns out that bishop C6 was slightly better here, because after bishop B7, the D7 square becomes a bit of a focal point. The bishop on H3, as I said earlier, which was quite strong, is attacking it. The rook on D1 is attacking it. At the moment, the knight on C5 is keeping it under control. So that leads White to think of a plan of driving the knight away. However, the immediate B4 is a bit risky, because after knight A4 here, you do get your rook D7, but then you get queen C4 in return, because you've moved the pawn from B3 to B4. And the queen's actually not bad on that square, because if you go and grab the pawn on E5 with check, king goes to A8, and then White's got some issues. Bishop E5, bishop D5, hacking on the A2 pawn, plus bishop takes B4 are both threatened. And you've kind of exposed your king for not as much as you would hope. Okay. F4 could have been played here simply because the pawn is pinned against the rook. After bishop D6, you keep going with F5 and try and break up the kingside pawns to activate your pieces in terms of capturing the weakened pawns. For example, if you take, the bishop takes, and then the H pawn is hard to defend. So knight G3 was played instead. I can see the idea behind this one. King to A8. F4 could have been played, but knight goes to E4. And again, it's this whole idea of trying to get rid of that knight on C5 so you can take control of D7. So knight takes E4 instead. F takes E4. Bishop C5 hitting the queen. Queen to F3. Now, bishop C6 is not a bad idea. Keeping an eye on D7 again. White would just probably play bishop F1 here, given that D7 isn't a square they're going to be using any longer, with the idea of then playing something like C4, and the idea is that F7 becomes a bit of a target. So rook E7 was played to protect E7, so queen goes to D3, queen to C6 hitting the E pawn. If you wanted to defend the E pawn, bishop G2 followed by king A7 is slightly advantageous for White, but yeah, two bishops for both sides, both are active. Control of the D file maybe is the slight advantage for White. Yeah. Instead, A3 was played. I don't know whether this is what we call a high-class waiting move. I mean, I think the idea here is to threaten something like B4, but even after that, bishop back to B6, so it should be okay. Instead of king A7, which was the right idea, because there is a check on the back rank, having kept the position pretty equal, unfortunately, Black now makes the game-ending blunder with queen takes E4. Looks okay. We're grabbing a pawn. But the back rank is still open for business with a check. Okay. King moves up. By the way, for some reason, chess.com gave this a double exclamation mark. This is a brilliant move, when it's just a pretty obvious move. King up, and then B4 is the right idea. Instead of playing B4 a move earlier, and running into bishop b6, so that queen d8 check couldn't be played. Doing it in this order just now wins a piece or a rook, because the bishop is the only thing defending the rook on e7, and the bishop either gets captured next move or has to move somewhere. But either or, it's basically after bishop b6, queen takes e7, White's now a rook up, one more move, Queen F3, forking the rook and the bishop, hoping to gain back at least the exchange. But after rook D7, the queen can't take the bishop on H3 because a rook takes B7. So this was the appropriate time to resign. So yeah, a quick game, played at 5 minutes. This is what happens at 5-minute chess. Probably, rook E7 you could criticise as setting up the loss. Certainly queen takes E4 was a mistake in this position, and king takes A7. But yeah, if you're running short of time, you're just banging out moves, these sort of things happen. The only other lesson here, of course, is in a position like this. I'm not sure how applicable it is in general, but G6 was a nice move. And if you're a fan of king hunts, you get a position like this at the end if black plays all the moves that white wants them to play. So thanks for watching this little summary of the ACT Chess Association events. My name's Sean Press. I run these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. As I said, Monday, Wednesday and Thursday. We are waiting on word of whether the chess clubs are going back. If they do go back, probably these weekly events might not run. Possibly the one that may still run is the Wednesday night Rapid, because that doesn't clash at the moment with any chess clubs as far as I know. But otherwise, we'll see how we go, possibly the end of the month before face-to-face chess resumes in the clubs here in Canberra, fingers crossed. So I'll do these summaries the next day after these events run, so I probably will be back doing a summary after the Wednesday night tournament on Thursday around about 10 AM. For those of you that missed the live broadcast, which is all of you except maybe one or two people, these stay up on Twitch.tv under Sean Press, ShaunPress, for 2 weeks, and then they disappear after that, so you've got 2 weeks to watch them before they go. So until my next broadcast, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.